Perception. Wolfgang Kohler, who lived between 1887 and 1967, was a German psychologist in the Gestalt branch. He questioned behaviorism as being too simplistic an approach that limited learning to environmental conditioning. Kohler instead argued that learning is a complex and dynamic process, and behavior psychology failed to credit intelligence and insight. When animals interact with the environment, they're not passive learners who only take what the condition allows them. Instead, they are also inventors, problem solvers, and insightful learners. By focusing too much on the outside environmental conditions, behavior psychology failed to understand how an animal's mental structure organizes perception. It's neither passive nor one-way street, and that everything originates on the outside and animal only reacts, but rather the animal has a robust mind of its own that influences reality to some degree. This is similar to Kant's philosophical argument that we impose our mental structure on the world. While Kohler's argument that humans are insightful learners and proactive in shaping reality, his arguments remain somewhat philosophically abstract. But our next cognitive psychologists made concrete cases for proactive perception and how the human mind is a powerful machine that impacts reality. Leon Festinger, who was born in 1919 and died in 1989, was a Russian-American psychologist who, also drawn to Gestalt psychology, further cemented the argument that we are not passive absorbers of information, but rather we have our own filter. In other words, our mind is very selective in what information to take in and what to ignore. You might ask what this filter is called. Festinger gave the example of our beliefs and convictions in how we see the world. In other words, we have biases, beliefs, convictions that allow us to see the world in a very particular way. We are not objective when it comes to reality. While our biased lens is commonly accepted by many, but how do you scientifically study human convictions shaping reality? Festinger looked at how individuals deal with the contradictions between belief and reality. Festinger coined the term cognitive dissonance, which means that when the evidence contradicts our strong belief, we feel discomfort due to our internal inconsistency. He studied a cult whose leader had received a message from aliens that the world would end on a certain date. However, when it didn't happen, instead of the cult members acknowledging their mistake, they became even more stronger in their conviction and found loopholes to justify their beliefs. This study, Oak Park as it's known, showed that the human animals are not passive to reality or evidence, but rather proactive to change reality or the environment based on their beliefs. In other words, we're not just conditioned by our environmental evidence, but we also condition our environment through our cognitive beliefs. First, we are shaped by reality, but we also shape reality in return. We are agents shaped by change, but we are also agents that bring about change. While Festinger showed that our belief and conviction narrow our perception of reality, it also helps us to create reality in some way. But the question remained as to how our mind decides what external evidence to accept and what evidence to reject. This question was answered by our next cognitive psychologist. Roger Shepard, who was born in 1929 and died in 2022, developed a theory that our mind not only interprets data coming through our sensory organs, but the mind also actively makes conclusions based on its own internal 3D model of the outside world. In other words, there is the outside world, we receive sensory signals, but the mind doesn't just sit still. Instead, it tries to make sense of the data, but actually rationalize its theories and come up with snappy conclusions. This happens so quickly for us to fully register. Why? The simple answer is pattern recognition. When we eat something delicious like a cherry, our mind quickly registers as a good food we can eat again. So next time we come across a cherry, it's easy. This became known as the law of generalization. We are wired to generalize all cherries as delicious. So animals are programmed to recognize patterns and generalize. In his experiment, he showed his subjects optical illusions, and the subjects were able to see through the illusion or rotate objects in their mind. Since you cannot fool people with some illusions, he concluded that the mind has an internal map of the external objects. What we perceive in our mind doesn't exist in our mind, but on the outside. But our mind thinks that the internal model is as real as the one on the outside. He famously said that the perception is externally guided hallucination. What we perceive to be real only exists on the outside, yet our mind thinks it does exist on the inside too. Therefore, he called externally guided hallucination. Dreams or actual hallucinations, on the other hand, are internally stimulated perception, he argued. In other words, when we dream or hallucinate, the thing doesn't exist on the outside, but entirely on the inside. Perception, however, does exist on the outside, but not on the inside. So Shepard concluded that our mind is able to rotate objects in the real world, not physically, but imaginatively, because the mind has a 3D model of the outside world. On a more philosophical level, many philosophers believe that the mind contains everything in the universe, or the universe is actually a mental reality. For example, Schopenhauer says, all ostensible minds can be attributed to matter, but all matter can likewise be attributed to mind. To sum up, while behaviorists ignore the capability of the human mind to shape reality, cognitive psychologists such as Kohler, Festinger, and Shepard were able to see our perception as a very active agent in shaping reality. Now let's shift our attention to attention. What is attention and how does it work? Is it a funnel or more like an ocean?